Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for making it back from your lunch, for those who got lunch. And for others who didn't, I have been told that at 4 p.m., sandwiches will be coming out. So we're at this really, really important discussion today, inclusion and safeguards, the cornerstone for achieving population-scale digital public infrastructure. This morning we heard from many dignitaries, many experts, many practitioners, and we spoke a lot about getting the technology right, as well as getting the safeguards right. And as we sit here today for this discussion, I would like to request that we really look at digital public infrastructure during this session from a user's perspective, from people centricity, as well as our planet centricity. Without a doubt, DPI has the potential to accelerate our sustainable development goals. You have heard from our tech envoy that in the adoption of the Global Digital Compact, 193 member states of the United Nations recognized the opportunity, the universality of DPI's opportunity to accelerate the sustainable development goals, but also recognized the urgent need for safeguards that is context-specific, safeguards that are not just principles, but implementable during each instance of DPI implementations. And we are really at a critical juncture because beyond the promise, beyond the leadership of the world that has come together, we need to start accelerating implementations. And our collective commitment today is going to really help us lay the digital foundations that can catalyze a brighter future for everyone, everywhere. Now we know that, of course, there are countries that are leading on digital public infrastructure implementations, and there are countries that are just getting started. But no matter what your maturity of the journey of the technology is, every country is facing risk or asking questions around privacy concerns that are being raised by people, by civil society organizations, by governments themselves, data security and exclusion. And this is why the Universal Digital Public Infrastructure Safeguards framework becomes extremely important. It's a framework that has been built collectively with the broader ecosystem that is multi-stakeholder. Many of you are here having contributed to it as working group members, as members of the international organizations, as countries that have started this journey so that we may learn by doing as we build this actionable universal digital public infrastructure framework. And to me, it's really a piece of art. And I say this because the implementation bias that we have taken in building this universal DPI safeguards is critical for its societal-wide adoption. And before I introduce our keynote, I want to perhaps take you through a journey, a short video, and a journey of how countries are already starting to adopt universal DPI safeguards in implementations.
Prioritized in the Global Digital Compact and gaining momentum as one of the UN Secretary General's high-impact initiatives, DPI is delivering impact at scale. It is turning possibilities into realities and empowering countries to transform our planet and people's lives all the way to the last mile. From Malawi to Finland to Brazil, DPI is a transformative people-first movement. This movement recognizes the need for safeguards as an upfront necessity, not an afterthought. Embedding universal principles across every step of the DPI design and implementation journey ensures that the rights of people are respected and preserved, and our planet is protected. This includes in Malawi, where 97% of Malawians have a legal digital ID being used to access services. This adoption saved the government $43 million in annual payments that were previously made to ghost beneficiaries. The same in Finland, where the X-Road data ecosystem offers over 800 public digital services and has scaled as a public good around the world. With a commitment to safeguards in the Brazilian digital government strategy, the Rural Environment Registry is helping to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement by reforesting 12 million hectares and creating interoperability between stakeholders and infrastructure across natural resources. But it is not just Malawi, Finland, and Brazil. The impact of DPI is growing, with more and more countries leveraging the transformative power of digital public infrastructure. To keep the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals, DPI represents a fundamental pivot that involves everyone, everywhere, and that includes you. Let's work together to build a safe and inclusive digital future for all.
This transformation starts with you. You are in the hot seats today. And with this, I'm very pleased to welcome our tech envoy, the UN Secretary General's envoy on technology, Mr. Amandeep Gill, for his keynote.
Thank you, Kesom. I thought when you said those of you who didn't get lunch, here's some food for thought. And it's a challenge speaking to this audience. You are leaders in the DPI space. So I'm wondering, what is it that I could say that would set us up nicely for this panel? Perhaps just to throw back to 2022, when in the preparation, the consultations for the Global Digital Compact started, and a critical input was a UN system-wide input that the Secretary General presented to that process, his policy brief on the Global Digital Compact. And he asked us at that time, so what are the strategic things that we could focus on to ensure that the digital transformation is leveraged for the Sustainable Development Goals, but is done so responsibly, inclusively, keeping the UN's values and the norms, particularly the international human rights treaties, front and center. So one of those strategic levers was the digital public infrastructure concept. And then the consultation negotiations started to build around that, keeping in mind the parallel discussion that were going on at that stage in the G20, where this concept was kind of struggling to break through to a consensus across these major economies. So those discussions on the GDC, the G20 conversation went in parallel. And then when we were looking at those strategic priorities, of course, there was this question of how do you frame this conversation in the context of the digital economy and bring to the diplomatic policy-making community in New York and Geneva the importance of the digital economy as a multilateral issue. Because the digital economy has been discussed in, plurilateral trade agreements. It's been discussed in the G7 and for some years now in the G20. But it's never really become a multilateral conversation, because there is no single UN entity or organization that leads on the digital economy. It's just the nature of the beast. So this was really capacity building of diplomats, and that's where you needed to kind of frame the GDC in a way that it was seen as an opportunity that's beyond connectivity. And again, DPIs were critical to that reframing. And so fast forward, a lot of things happened along the way. But when we came together the previous Sunday at the Summit of the Future, it was literally like 3 bullets kind of hitting each other at the same time. The negotiations on the Global Digital Compact, the work on centering the digital economy in the multilateral space, and within that DPIs, and then of course the AI governance discussion, because everything is connected. And this morning you heard Nandan speak about not taking a siloed approach. And in terms of digital governance, digital cooperation, it's very important that we also don't take a siloed approach. When you pull on the AI string, with it comes data. You pull on the data string, with it comes digital public infrastructure, connectivity, skills, and the protection, the governance we need around all these issues. So that's the importance of the moment, the timing around this conversation. And we have a long way to go. So I don't think we should be patting ourselves in the back, but we shouldn't get complacent because we have, in low-income countries, only 21% of women have access to the internet. So this is just one example of the gap we still need to work on. So no time for complacency, time for hard work actually. And one of the tools that we have at our disposal now, you saw with the video, and Kesom, you mentioned that, and many of the contributors, including one of our co-rapporteurs, Sanjay, where are you? Is here. This is the Universal DPI Safeguards framework. And we've benefited from these 44 global experts who came together to shape it. We benefited from the international organizations, not just the Onusian organization, the UN type organization, but also World Bank, OECD, DIAL, GovStack, and others who are active in this space, who are present in the room. So it's the product of that labor, and it's more than just a report. It's a nice read, if I may say so. Thank you to the group for putting together something that's so accessible. But at the same time, it's a practical tool. It's a knowledge framework. So you have the principles, you have ways to look at risks, you have a way to dawn personas, like, you can imagine yourself as a government official who wants to take forward DPIs in a certain way. So what do you need to do? What do you need to know? So you can enter this knowledge framework and get the right guidance. You have some KPIs, and then you have, most importantly, a way to keep this relevant as things change, because today's DPIs are what they are, but tomorrow the situation might be very different. Different contexts may adapt these differently. So how do we make sure that we remain abreast of those developments and up to date in terms of our thinking about risks, safeguards, safety, inclusion, sustainability to people and planet? So there is that possibility there, and some feedback loops through in-country implementation, but also gatherings such as this summit. I think this would become more and more important in the future. Now, there is this element of trust that Madhukar mentioned this morning. The digital transformation moves at the pace of trust. I think the safeguards framework is an important mechanism in our hands to strengthen that trust, to take all of society along as we move forward on the digital transformation journey. And this will be important as the digital economy plays a stronger and stronger role in the overall economic transformation. The minister said today that 6% of Egypt's GDP is now coming from the ICT sector at large. In many fast-growing emerging economies, this sector is growing at 2.5 times the rest of the GDP. So how can we keep doing that, but keep doing that in a way that you don't create more inequalities, exclusion, keep doing that in a way that no private or public sector player can exploit these powerful technologies to turn them into tools of surveillance, exclusion, or worse. So this work has only started, and I'm sure, with the panel you would dig deeper into some of the questions around it. But I will close with this. Kesom said it starts with you. I think just as it has come to this point with you, let's make sure that it keeps going forward with you. Thank you.
Brazil's national digital strategy prioritizes safe and inclusive digital public infrastructure. Universal access, interoperability, safe, scalable standards, secure data sharing, transparency and environmental sustainability integration. Brazil actively maps risks and tries to mitigate them. Pix is used by 140 million individuals, 13 million businesses. Seeking inputs from the ecosystem was a critical success factor. Rules of governance continues to be improved. With civil society participation such as the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Protection. This organization ensures active dialogue between creators of Pix and consumers. The Rural Environmental Registry was created as a public registry for reforesting 12 million hectares. With high adoption, the registry today enables multiple uses from credit to traceability, building the bonds between stakeholders and natural resources. Ensure effective remedy and redress. Respond to gender, ability, or age. Ensure access to independent, accessible, and effective remedies.
By leveraging digital public infrastructure, Brazil is strengthening a whole set of crucial government policies, such as the Digital ID, the Unified Register for Social Programs, and the innovative Rural Environmental Registry, therefore promoting citizenship, eradicating poverty, and enabling a sustainable future. We are committed to building such infrastructure safely and inclusively, benefiting from the active engagement of our vibrant civil society.
That was really inspiring. And as I walk back and forth, I'm just wondering who has completed 3,000 steps for their day. It's a large convention center, and I think we're getting our exercises also. I mean, we've started a movement. You have started a movement. And to really sustain and succeed is an intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability. Everyone here and so many others who have been part of this movement have spoken about the need for the safeguards that lead to safer and more inclusive societies. We've heard from Minister Talat, many dignitaries, Nandan, and so many others that spoke about the desirability. So that commitment is there because 193 countries have come together and said, we want it, we need it to achieve the SDGs. As we saw in the showcases of Brazil, Finland, Malawi, and many others that you will see through the course of this panel, tell us that it is feasible. It is feasible to leverage digital public infrastructure to create safer, more inclusive digital futures for everyone. And of course, we can do more. Now, the question is, how do we make it viable? How do we make it possible in every country, in the 135 plus countries where there are digital public infrastructure implementation journeys starting or at some point in their life cycle? How do we make safer, more inclusive societies a reality in this big, amazing movement that we have today at the Global DPI Summit? And that, of course, needs capital, commitment, and capacity. So I am very thrilled to introduce some amazing panelists this afternoon. Dr. Huda. Dr. Huda is the advisor to the Egyptian Minister for Technology Talent across a gamut of digital transformation initiatives. Thank you. Vice Minister Armando Manzueta, Public Innovation and Technology Ministry from the Dominican Republic, as well as a member of the Digital Public Infrastructure Safeguards Working Group. And an inspiration to many, Mrs. Rohini Nilekani, Chairperson of the Nilekani Philanthropies. Matthew, who is the Director for Inclusion, Safety, and Civil Society Engagement at Co-Develop, one of our hosts for today, as well as a working group member. And we have Priya Vora, CEO of Digital Impact Alliance, as well as the co-chair of the Digital Public Infrastructure Safeguards Governance Working Group. How is everyone feeling?
All good? Good, yeah.
All right. Yesterday we had, so today is day one for everyone, but yesterday we had day zero. Those of who were here at the hotel, we had an excellent workshop on how do we accelerate implementation of safeguards across countries. And we heard from 22 different civil society organizations, multilateral organizations, some private sector, and it's remarkable how much there are, of course, commitment, as we spoke about commitment as one of the C's. There was also recognition that we need more capital and more capacity. So I am delighted to turn to you, Dr. Huda, especially in your role as the technology talent development advisor to the Egyptian minister. What does it take to build the right kind of talent now and for the future? And I really loved what Nandan said in the morning, or I don't know if it was afternoon or already, but he talked about strategic clarity. You know, we are going to have a number of gaps in our implementations, but that strategic clarity of moving capacity in the right direction, of using technology to create safer, more inclusive societies. Thank you, Dr. Huda.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased actually for being here in this important session. And you rightly mentioned it, safeguards and capacities. I mean, what is the relation between digital public infrastructure safeguards and capacity building? I think this is something that the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology has been working on since actually 2000, since the establishment of the ministry. We realized that one of the strength points in Egypt is the manpower, and definitely also we realized the gap that exists between our products that is coming out from education and the market needs. And of course, with what is happening and the evolution of technologies that is very, very fast, we see this gap also is widening, despite the efforts that is undergoing by the Ministry of Higher Education or the Ministry of Education in Egypt. Still, there is a big gap between the product that comes out from the education system and from the other side, the dialogue that we have with the multinational companies and what are the requirements for the skills and needs for the market, and also for making sure that we have the right capacities in our implementations for digital public infrastructure. And according to that, we've actually at the ministry, we tried at our best to make sure that we are designing a set of initiatives that actually respond to the gap that exists in the market needs, that also respond to making sure that we have the right capacities that we need to build the digital Egypt. And maybe I will give some examples of initiatives that we have worked on. First one related very much to building digital Egypt is what we call Digital Egypt Builders Initiative. And in this initiative, actually, the president assigned the ministry to make sure that we have the top-notch graduates, making sure that they have the best qualified skills for the emerging technologies. And by emerging technologies, we definitely consider artificial intelligence, data science, data analytics, cybersecurity, embedded systems, digital arts. And it was important that we do that in collaboration, in partnership. We definitely believe very much in partnership. So partnership with two different arms. One arm with international universities, because the output of these trainees was to get a professional master degree and not an academic theoretical master degree. And also the second arm is to partner with most of the IT multinational companies in order to make these trainees certified with the top technologies so that they can actually provide the contribution required. In addition to these two elements, trainees also need to make sure that they have the right language. So English language was part of the program, and also the soft skills. So this was our first program that started. And then we realized that we need to go beyond these top-notch graduates. And we started moving to schools, all right? And of course, Egypt is a very large country. And definitely we all know about the challenges of the access, the infrastructure in schools. And we didn't want to stop by okay, we are lacking access in schools and so forth. So we started another program that is also targeting students in schools with a new model of, we call it the 75-25 model, where 75% of the time it's online and 25% of the time students comes to physical data centers. We partnered again with multinational companies. We also partnered with the civil society for the labs, for the physical locations. And we have worked with grade 7 to grade 11 students. More than 100,000 of these students are trained on also top technologies. And the objective here was to introduce ICT for the students in schools, to make them understand what is science, technology, and math, so that we encourage them to go to STEM, and to make sure that they understand how actually they can even help the community and help their families in order to access to digital services for the digital portal. We just also extended this after the big success and the big request coming from the families. We actually moved even lower to grade 4 to 6 with the Digital Egypt Marvels initiative. One of the strategic priorities also for Egypt is making sure that we increase the exports from the ICT sector. We actually heard this morning our minister saying that the growth rate for the ICT sector is 16% for the last 6 years. And part of it, of course, the contribution in the GDP, and part of it is increasing our export. So Digital Egypt pioneers, it's about increasing our export from ICT sector by increasing the portion of the freelancing. So we started with the first round of 15,000 trainees from different universities, from different schools, from different faculties, and even for graduates. And this is a training for like 30 job profiles, 30 different job profiles in all aspects of technologies, AI, ERP, so that they can actually contribute. We understand very much the importance of capacity building, of skills, and that is one of the safeguards for digital public infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huda. It's really, really inspiring to hear your both tactical short-term measures, but also the long-term capacity. And ladies and gentlemen, often when you think about capacity building, especially in the sustainable development or developing country contexts, increased capacity means that you also have better capacity when you are building the right regulations or the governance frameworks or strengthening the institutions that need to hold technologies more accountable, because you also need to understand technology and how it will respond to people and our planet's needs. But Dr. Huda, I also really loved that you spoke about markets, about the role of state, government, as well as the role of society and civil, CSOs or civil society or community groups. And I want to turn to you, Rohini. You have a book that's called Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar. If anybody speaks Hindi, they will understand it, or even Urdu. But Samaj means society, Sarkar means government, and Bazaar means market. And for us to really deliver on the potential of technology and in particular digital public infrastructure, these three need to come together, not as frictions, but as collaborations. And Rohini, I want to ask you, what is your perspective as you bring Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar and talk about the need for safeguards in digital public infrastructure?
Thank you so much, Kizom, and namaste, everyone. I think it was mentioned in the morning as well. It's absolutely critical that society, state, and market, Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar work together seamlessly and remain in a dynamic balance to move DPI goals forward. You simply cannot solve any single human problem without involving all the three sectors. And my position on this, because I'm from the nonprofit sector perhaps, has been that Samaj comes first, society comes first, and in the sense of the topic we are talking about, I think that's important. We're all human beings first. What joins us together first of all is that we're all human beings. Next, that we're all citizens. And I think the state and the market, in this case for the delivery of DPI services, has to work for society. That's why we are talking about safeguards and inclusion. And so the Samaj, society, the first sector actually, has to be very much involved in ensuring that people, citizens, human beings, at the first mile, where there are the biggest vulnerabilities, is truly involved in ensuring that all the wonderful rules, principles, values articulated in this framework that was delivered are actually adhered to. We must, as society institutions, hold the states accountable, hold the markets accountable to make sure there is inclusion, that nobody gets left behind. And we know exactly how and why people get left behind. And that's why markets are very good at innovating on top of the public digital highways that are getting created. We need markets to unleash innovation, to deliver new services that people need. We need civil society to make sure nobody forgets the person at the first mile. And of course, we need the state to create the policy, the frameworks that allow DPI to flourish, because they have to provide the budgets, they have to create the right environment and ecosystem in which DPI can move forward. Very briefly, I will say, I have been watching this journey together with my husband, Nandan Nilekani, of the last 10 or 12 years. And I truly believe that DPI is an opportunity to create economic democracy in countries around the world, because that foundation that it allows for everybody to access, to increase dignity, agency, and choice in everything, to be able to send money to my mother if she needs it, to be able to find a scholarship for my child, to be able to find a good price in the market if I'm selling fish. For 100 reasons, having that digital public infra, open, transparent, accountable, inclusive, is actually, these are the building blocks of economic democracy. And so we need Samaj, we need Sarkar, and we need Bazaar. And that's what we're going to have to do very quickly, because we lost a lot of time in the pandemic for the sustainable goals. We were getting somewhere, and we got halted. All this group has to hurry us back and get us back to there by 2030. Thank you, Izo.
Thank you so much, Rohini. I really love that you said that Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar needs to work together, but who comes first? Society. And I love that you said we are all human beings, because human rights is everyone's fundamental right. And it is the critical value that underpins the Digital Public Infrastructure Universal Safeguards framework. It is time, indeed, for us to accelerate our actions together. And with this, we may want to see another showcase from another country in, I think, West Africa.
This is India's DPI story towards
India.
safe and inclusive societies. India is a global leader in leveraging technology to drive economic growth and foster innovation. Building on the success of decade-long success in DPI, like Aadhaar and UPI, the country is extending DPI across all SDGs, sectors such as health, education, commerce, agriculture for new era of progress. In 2023, the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare started Vistar, a new DPI journey for its millions of smallholder farmers. Vistar is an at-scale open digital network to empower farmers and ensure food security for 1.4 billion people. As a DPI, its interoperability is designed to break down barriers and frictions of language and geography. Vistar serves as a model for developing open interoperable digital networks across developing countries. This emerging class of DPI from India marks a significant step forward to a digitally enabled future. Let's hear from Arun, a smallholder farmer.
खेती का जो पुराने व्यवस्था से कर रहे थे, उस व्यवस्था के बदले हमें चैट बॉट मिला है, जिससे हमें जानकारी मिलती है और उसी जानकारी के अनुसार हम अभी नए ढंग से खेती कर रहे हैं, जिससे हर तरह के सुविधा, रख रखाव, कटाई, बुआई या सिंचाई हो, कीटनाशक हो, कोई भी तरह के जानकारी लेना तो चैट बॉट से हम सुविधा लेते हैं और उसी अनुसार हम खेती करते हैं।
Universal DPI Safeguards as a necessity. Vistar, the agriculture DPI, fosters community engagement, ensuring farmers participate to provide feedback in an environment of trust. Vistar is built leveraging digital public goods, working in close collaboration with XStep Foundation to make it accessible for other countries. Vistar's digital assets or building blocks are open for knowledge sharing. The federated open specification network of public and private providers makes services accessible, discoverable, and affordable for farmers. With a unified network protocol, Vistar, as a public infrastructure, ensures interoperability, enabling data exchanges between all solutions.
Armando, I'm going to come to you next. Rohini spoke about her belief in DPI's potential, as I think all of us in this room shares. As a government official from Dominican Republic, how are you looking at building DPIs that are safe and inclusive for your society?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to be here and speak to you about something that I have a very deep passion, and I think we're going to do a lot of great things. Well, first of all, when we look at DPIs, we need to understand that these are foundational pieces of technology, pieces of software that are essential to provide any sort of services to the, not just to the population, but also to other government institutions and the private sector abroad. And as such, data is the lifeblood of these systems. It's at the core of everything, no matter if it's payments or exchange of information across certain registries, civil registry, healthcare, private sector, the like. And of course, I think the most important one, which is identity, which is very important, very sensible personal information. In that regard, I think one of the best point of entry for implementing safeguards is to devising a policy for data management, for data governance that actually takes into consideration how we can actually protect this important asset, which is the information, not just personal data for people, but also from organizations and even sensible information that the government needs to run itself. So in that regard, what we're planning is, we're starting basically, is to, first of all, identify the information needs of every institution, of every organization, and classify them according to the importance and the relevance for the provision of a certain service of a certain government function. Afterwards, we're going to define the rules, and these rules will be co-created not just with the organizations in mind, but also with citizens and civil society organizations, because we need the input of everyone so we can better understand their needs and what are their concerns regarding the government handling certain information and how that information would be exchanged and how on the channels and everything. And then we want to start working on, well, taking the DPIs that we currently have in place for data exchange, for example, and then to do the proper implementations on how we can translate these kind of rules that we have defined for protecting people's information, for safeguarding their integrity, and of course, building up the key aspects from the technological perspective on how we can prevent exclusion of certain elements of society into the same infrastructures as well. So from that regard, this is what we're planning and and the things that we're doing. Luckily for us, some of the most important DPIs that we have, which is the X-Road, currently has some some safeguards in place, especially for consent and for data management, especially in the new version that they're releasing in the coming weeks. And there are others that we're going to implement into other DPIs that we have, especially for authentication and data management from a citizen perspective. So that's what we're going to do.
Armando, thank you so much. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
If I want to revoke consent of my data use in data exchange in Dominican Republic, what is possible for me as a citizen of Dominican Republic?
Okay, this is something that we're actually working on because we don't have proper data protection rules in place. So part of this strategy is basically to define the policy that will allow citizens to do that. We have a new draft law that is basically finished, that is basically almost being sent to Congress, that will recognize the law, recognize the right for the citizen to actually limit the treatment of personal information across different systems. There is a technically legal way to do that, but it's very cumbersome because it implies going to a tribunal and limiting instances and going to a judge and everything. But we're going to try to simplify that process for it to be as seamless as possible, and you can do it from the same applications and services that the citizens provides throughout the web. However, there are some of those things that we can go advancing from an internal perspective, while the law is being sanctioned by Congress.
Thank you so much, Armando. You've been such a leader in the Universal DPI Safeguards Working Group, and it's great to hear that this is, you're looking into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. We continue to learn from your leadership.
Thank you.
Rohini, you talked about private sector innovations on digital public infrastructure, and I want to reflect on what a difficult task government officials in many countries have. Dr. Huda represents the government of Egypt. Armando, you represent the government of Dominican Republic. So I want to turn to you, Matthew. What is the role of non-governmental actors in safe and inclusive societies through digital public infrastructure implementations? And can they be innovating safeguards, stuff?
No, absolutely. And thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to be with other colleagues here. I think one of the big lessons, and it's really interesting today to be hearing how much the criticality of societal actors is a part of the discussion. Because I think one of the lessons that we've taken from the last 10 years of implementing and seeing DPI being executed in different contexts is that there has been an underappreciation for the criticality of building support and consensus across the societal actors. Because DPI, in its ambition to be population scale, wants to have the buy-in from and establish this capability in many different places. And if those actors are not on board, what we're seeing is that sometimes there can be contests, there can be pushback, and ultimately the value of DPI comes from the engagement in the ecosystem. No one wants an ID system or an instant payment system that no one is using. And so, but to get that use, there must be trust. And so the process of building that trust comes from, the conversations with different actors, having them a part of the process of designing and implementing the system, and then ultimately the structures around how the things are governed. And so many of my colleagues from civil society and other public interest organizations have been saying for much of the last 10 years, however transformative this technology is, which we're bought into that, unless we get the values and the governance and the collaboration right, it's not enough. And so I think it's really heartwarming to see that that's now part and central part of the discussion. And I think the UN, in taking leadership around the Safeguards Initiative, provides an umbrella framework for this work. And I think now, as we move into implementation and focus with countries, like the Dominican Republic with Armando and many of the others, I think we can now try to really shift those power dynamics at the country level to build that trust and that support. So.
I love that, Matthew. Shift the power dynamics, the coming together of society, government, and markets is really about collaborating and putting, ultimately, no matter what your business models or, incentive structures are, putting people and your responsibility to them first and foremost. Priya, I'm going to turn to you. Priya has, had the very difficult task of being a co-chair of the governance working group. We've had about 6 working groups, and Amandeep talked about Sanjay, who is the chief rapporteur here, and the other chief rapporteur is in Trinidad and Tobago at the moment. But Priya, you had a difficult task of stewarding a multi-stakeholder dialogue, plus trying to make sure we move into implementation contexts. Can you speak a little bit about, from the principles to the processes and the practices that are part of this knowledge architecture of a evolving, adaptable universal DPI safeguards framework? What's your key takeaway that you would share with us?
Well, thank you, Kazam, and thanks for your leadership over the last several months as we've developed the framework. Indeed, it was one of those undertakings that I was a little bit nervous about at first, because when you hear the word safeguards, it's easy to think maybe this is a way to put the brakes on DPI. We need safeguards first, and then we can start thinking about adoption and implementation. You need to have your policies in place first. You need to have your data protection authority in place first. You need to have all of this in place first, and then think about technology adoption. So I think what was really the aha moment of our working group on governance was that, in fact, it isn't linear. It is really embedded, and as Matthew says, these important components of institutions and of policies and good design have to be our accelerators of adoption. Rohini says that we're so far behind on the SDGs, and that's true. We're in this unacceptable situation where half of the world's population over the age of 10 have never been on the internet. So what I was really pleased about was that this was a community that came together, acknowledging that safeguards and implementation have to be hand in hand and embedded together. So that predisposition to action, I suppose, is the key takeaway. And I would urge everyone to look at the report, because it's only through normalizing it, socializing it, really internalizing the 300 steps and 300 actions that can be taken through the design, implementation, and governance framework that it really comes to life. But the other thing I would say is that for it to be really meaningful, there are 2 things that we very much need to be focused on, and we've heard it today. One is capability. We can't talk about all of this stuff about good DPI unless there's true talent and understanding, and not just on core skills, but in helping policymakers and developers learn how to learn. Technology is moving so quickly, so how do you really create that engine of learning and capability? And the second thing is, of course, civil society, media, researchers who are gathering the metrics, the stories, the data that are going to hold institutions accountable. So those would be my 2 calls to action from here. Thanks.
Priya, thank you so much. And you're right, it was really hard to do implementation and safeguards together. But what's the most rewarding thing about that experience is that it's now embedded. Doing implementation means doing safeguards. If it's not safe and inclusive, it's not DPI. So please remember these KPIs. I'm rhyming, guys. I know that we are going to take us to one more country, but before we get there, I want to turn to you, Rohini, and you know, you have been a philanthropist, a CSO leader, and today when we talk about multi-stakeholder, not just perspectives or engagement, but actions, how do we get societal actors more engaged and involved and doing, innovating? Intentional innovation were some words that I heard from the morning. You know, could you give us some examples of what that might look like from Brazil, South Africa, India, the places that you kind of catalyze actions?
So recently we have, and some of my colleagues are here, Sanjay and others, we have, together with other global funders, set up the Center for Exponential Change. And through that, we hope that we will be able to accelerate system orchestration of complex societal problems that need to be solved in conjunction with the whole ecosystem using, hopefully, DPIs. And examples are coming, I don't know how much time we have, but from Brazil, from South Africa, and we are looking at, even from the US, some experimentation going on, and of course in India, as you know. And I think whether it's to do with payments, whether it's to do with improving agriculture productivity, whether it's to do with education, whether it's to do with women's safety, a lot of system orchestrators are coming forward to use this technology, to use digital public infra to gather more people and bring more people's energy and creativity to solve the problem. And my call to action here would be I think we need a lot more private philanthropic capital to come into this space. Today, I'm so happy to say that I know everybody in this room has the power of intent. We all want to use digital public infrastructure to create societal good. Now, with this framework developed by so many of you in this room, we now have the grammar of our intent, because sometimes the power of our intent is not enough. And now we have a language we can all use together to accelerate DPI. We need private philanthropic capital. We need patient capital to come and back the innovation that is happening now around the world, especially in smaller countries that would need more assistance. So I know I twisted your question a little bit to what I wanted to say, but I think it's a call for, there's a lot of wealth floating around, as we all know, and that wealth must be deployed to increase public good. Because there is a lot of innovation happening, it does need patient capital to give it wing.
Absolutely, absolutely, Rohini. There's a lot of innovation happening and they need to be supported, surfaced, and shared. And you know, we often think of social cash transfers or humanitarian transfers even as a responsibility of the public sector, of the government. How many of you have worked with ministries of social protection and the likes, or ministries of agriculture that distribute benefit transfers? But there's one civil society organization that's, you know, making these benefit transfers easier to complete, eligibility around, and access. So I think that kind of societal action is what makes DPI-enabled services more accessible, more inclusive. And you know, while working on these, you know, actions, also trying to improve what government does. So I think it's important for us to be in a place where we put the capital behind the actions. And with this, I think my colleague has said we have one nice video. No? Okay, he's saying take questions, and then we might go to Nigeria. Okay. With this, we have some mics floating around. Time is up. I'm so sorry, guys. Did we chat away? How about this? If you have any questions, I will be waiting at the door, and I can collect all the questions. One question, please, and then we're done. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. All the safeguards that we are coming out with for the DPIs, when the citizens feel that with all this data that is being shared, that the Big Brother is watching, how are these safeguards helping citizens with these fears?
I think that's a very, very big question. If my panelists don't mind, I'm happy to take this quickly, but also come to you for a longer discussion. Any technology has the potential to do harm, and if you just build DPIs with only technology, of course, there are risks of surveillance, there are risks of privacy lost, but with the right standard operating mechanism around who operates and who has access to shared data becomes really important to not just specify, but also uphold and monitor. Legal redress is important, so governance frameworks and the rule of law becomes extremely important. And of course, as these capacities are being developed in countries by governments, the role of societal actors also become extremely important to highlight these instances and resolve it as they come up. With this, thank you so much. We are programming our future for safer, more inclusive societies. I want to give a generous round of applause to my inspiring panelists. And thank you so much for bearing with us.